Hi everyone, I'm Stefan Wittmann, Product Manager at InterSystems. And in this Lightboard session, I want to introduce you to InterSystems API Management, a new feature we offer with our database platform, and I want to tell you why this is something to be excited about. So assume you have your Iris instance sitting here, which exposes a couple of REST services or web services. What you can do with this little box, which is our API management piece, you can route all your HTTP traffic through this box. This is HTTP. And the way how you can do this is you can configure a service in here, which is an abstraction layer and basically just points to your upstream service, which we have here, and points to a specific API. Then you go on and define a so-called route, which tells the system that from a certain domain and a certain path, you forward all the traffic to this endpoint. With this simple setup, you already can do quite a lot. The first thing you can do is traffic monitoring. So you can go into the system and figure out which consumer is consuming which APIs, how often, in which frequency. Is he calling all your APIs? Is he calling only specific endpoints? Is he using your latest version of the API or just an old version? Is your old version of the API unused and you can get rid of it? These kinds of questions can be answered with this. The second thing you want to do is traffic control. So you can configure groups of consumers and tell the system how many requests they can do per interval. So assume I have a consumer I call Fred, and Fred uses our free tier of the system. So Fred is allowed to do 100 calls per hour. I have a second developer whom I will call John, who is a user of our paid tier. So he's allowed to do 1,000 requests per minute. This way, you can protect yourself against failure from the developers, you can protect yourself against DOS attacks and various other things. What you have to have in mind, these developers might sit next to you in your office and know exactly what your APIs look like, but in other cases, these developers are not part of your organization. They don't know what your APIs look like, what APIs you offer in general, so you have to onboard them. The way how you do this is with a developer portal. This is a set of web pages that automatically get generated, which are customizable, so you can make sure they look like something that your company has built. They include your company logo and fit your style. They list all the APIs that you offer in all your backends. And the way how this is being fed into the system is with an open API specification known as a Swagger specification. So you feed this specification file into your developer portal for every API that you have. So you might have multiple specification files for multiple APIs. This way, your developer portal is always up to date and represents everything that you offer on your backend. Also, it is interactive, which means all your developers see all the APIs that they've signed up for, that they're authorized for, and they can test them and see how the API actually behaves. The way how you get your specification file, you can do this on two ways. Either you already have code on your Iris instance and you have a REST interfaces implemented. then you can generate a specification file which represents your backend. If you feed this into the system, you always have a synchronized documentation of your APIs. The other way around is if you have a spec-first approach, which means you design your APIs first in a Swagger specification file, and then you can push this file into Iris, and we will generate all the code scaffolding that you need for your backend and link back to your business logic, which is obviously decoupled from the generated code. This is a very common approach if you have multiple teams contributing to your API design, like a front-end developer and a back-end development team. The next thing you can do with this is blue-green deployments and canary releases. The way how you do this is you define multiple targets inside your box, A and B, which all point to different systems. So this is Iris 1, this is Iris 2. A goes to Iris 1, B goes to Iris 2. You group them together as an upstream, which represents the whole entity as a service, and then you point a route to it. This way, you can tell the system how many percentages of each calls basically get routed to 1 or 2. For blue-green deployments, you usually have a hard switch. So you say 100% of my calls get routed to Iris 1, 0% of my calls get routed to Iris 2. I deploy a new feature on this instance. I do a hard switch. And then I monitor my system and check that everything is fine and in shape. And then I basically just turn it around, and for the next time I deploy my new feature on Iris 1. Canary releases is basically very similar. The only thing is you don't do a hard switch, but instead you slowly fail over to Iris 2 and route only like 5% or so to your second instance. This way you can monitor if everything behaves as you expect. Latency is fine on your management box. The back end, you want to check that your CPU is fine, that your database growth is as expected. And as soon as you're comfortable with it, you do the full switch and fail over to Iris 2. So these are a couple of things that you can do with InterSystems API management, which already is quite exciting. Give it a try. Let us know what you think and expect more content soon. Thanks.